So I have a great opportunity this morning to introduce to you somebody who has been incredibly important in my life and in my faith. And I want everyone to meet Jeff Mugford. Hi, Jeff.
Hey, what's happening?
Thank you
Good to be
for,
with you.
yes, thank you for being with us today and for just taking time to talk to me. Jeff and I have known each other for, let's see here.
1983 is when I
Oh my
came to
gosh.
Casper.
So Jeff was my youth pastor.
You were like 2 years old, I think.
I was just two. And there are so many things I could say about the fact that I will be 50 years old this year and he's still impacting my life. And so we are friends. He has been a ministry encourager, and obviously he was very formational in my own faith journey. And so I asked him to be here today because part of what he did in my life has a lot to do with what I want to talk about today. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about him. He grew up in Sacramento, went to Warner Pacific College in Portland. And again, he told you, we met when I was in actually seventh grade. I wasn't two, seventh grade in Casper, Wyoming, when he came to Highland Park Community Church to be the youth pastor.
My very first job.
First job.
My first real job,
first real
where
job.
people were paying me to do ministry.
We all have the first real job, right?
Yeah,
my first year out of college, I had like 7 different tax forms that came from 7 different jobs.
Oh, wow.
That I was
Okay.
together. So yeah, I understand the first real full-time job thing. So he has spent a lifetime in ministry to youth, church planting, being a senior pastor, and now even doing some work in the nonprofit world. And so I just wanted to give him a chance to talk a little bit about his own journey in ministry, and then I'm going to ask him some questions. So what else would you like to share with people in Tulsa and the well, Jeff?
Yeah. So I met Denise, like you said, she was a 7th grader, and she was full of energy, full of dreams. We were just talking a little bit about, she told me one of our first meetings, when I said, Denise, what do you want to do with your life? And she sang a little bit. She would sing on Sunday nights at our church, and which was a much smaller crowd. She hadn't made it to the Sunday morning worship team yet. But I remember her saying, I want to be the next Sandy Patty. Sandy Patty was huge then. And of course, Sandy Patty has a huge voice. In fact, she lives right there in Tulsa now.
Oklahoma City, I think.
Oklahoma City, yeah.
And I did get to meet her when I was in my 20s. I got to sing backup for her.
That's incredible. Yeah. But I remember thinking, as a 7th grader, I'm going, her voice is okay, but is she ever going to be a Sandy Patty? Well, you've heard her sing, and she's incredible, and how she developed. I was just telling her earlier when we were talking, how determined she was. And I think she gets that from her mom. Her mom's very determined and strong, a strong woman. Her parents, Denise's parents, Bob and Dee, Bob is, of course, with the Lord now and has received his eternal reward, but they had a big impact on me as a young youth pastor. There were a couple of times they had to correct me. I didn't totally do all of the detail work on a couple trips and things like that, and they would let me know. But they were incredible servants of the Lord at the first church that I worked in. But so Denise has always been one of those former students of mine that I'm so proud of. And when her book Mile Markers came out, she sent a copy to me, and she was like, hey, read the dedication in there. And I'm reading this dedication, and it's to my wife and I, Cindy, and we're just weeping. It's like, oh my goodness. I left Casper and hooked up with a friend of mine that was planting a church in the Phoenix area. And so we were the first associate there, the first youth pastor there. And part of the story was we had just started thing that we did there, a church service for youth called Hot Church.
Hot Church.
Hot Church, and she sang, and it was.
Let me just tell you though, the first Sunday I was there, this is how Hot Church was definitely Hot Church. The first Sunday I was there, the guitarist jumped off the stage and pretty much tried to do the splits on the front. Yes. I was like, oh my, we weren't kidding when we called it Hot Church.
It was crazy. Yeah. Oh.
And that was like 1992. So that's before anybody was doing stuff like that. So
1992,
I just want to say Jeff was on the cutting edge of like, what do we do to help reach a generation that needs to see that the gospel is relevant, that God's story for them means something to their lives. And how can we connect with them and get them here? Yeah. So you've planted how many churches?
Yeah. So I was part of that plant. That plant, of course, was incredible. It's what my wife and I call our glory years, because our one son that we have, he was growing up. So that's the church he grew up in. He came of age there, became a guitar player and a musician and worship leader. So we got to kind of watch him grow and develop there. He's still in the music industry now in LA, but we were there for 16 and a half years. So we took that from the 12 kids who didn't like each other to over 500 kids by 2003, 4, 5, when we left. And the reason we left, I mean, it was so good. I mean, I had this church of students. I was preaching every week to them. It was wild, lasers, and it was loud. We were loud. Guitar players still jumping off of stages and craziness. And I came to, well, there were a lot of things that happened, but God had been working in my heart to become a senior pastor. At that point, I think I was 46, 47 years old. And God had kind of birthed this, hey, I think I want to take that next step. We left that church, took a little church up in Oregon. It wasn't a good fit for us. And then we planted a church back in the Phoenix area.
So tell us, because I know you're pastoring now and you're also doing some nonprofit work, right?
Yeah, a friend of mine that had had begun a utility scale solar power company. He was a parishioner in my church in Phoenix. And he had started this company, and he said, Pastor, if the Lord blesses our company, I'm going to tithe off of all of our earnings. I'm going to give 10% of all of our earnings. 2 or 3 years later now, he said, Jeff, he goes, Depcom Power is taking off. And I'm trying to keep my commitment to give 10%, but I'm writing these checks to organizations I don't even know what they're doing sometimes. Would you consider coming on staff and finding great nonprofit organizations where we are building? We've built so far in Mississippi, North Carolina, Virginia, Connecticut, Rhode Island, all over the place, Colorado. We haven't built in Oklahoma yet.
No, we're vying for that.
And I keep telling Denise, if we build in Oklahoma, we're going to make a donation to the well.
Yay!
So anyway, we'll buy one of the meals or something that you do, or maybe a couple of them. So I've been doing that for the past 5 years. In the meantime, the home church that I grew up in Sacramento, as Denise said, the home church that I grew up in called, when I was a kid here, they were probably running about 400 or 500. So, a healthy church. They were down to about 30 people. This was 2017. They called me and they said, hey, so we're either going to close our doors or someone has to come help us kind of get going again and revive again. Now, we can't pay you much, but would you consider coming back, to Sacramento? And so I said, well, I've got this other job, so I don't need to be paid much. But I was missing, preaching every Sunday and leadership situations. So that's where I'm at now. The last 4 years, I've been pastoring the church that I grew up in. before the pandemic, now I don't know who attends our church, Denise, because we can't meet, and I don't know who's going to come back or what, but we had stabilized. We were running about 120. So, I bless nonprofits with resources from this utility scale solar power company, and I'm pastoring my home church.
So back in the day, before we knew how dangerous really some youth ministry games were, I watched Jeff. No. It was you that put yourself in danger, not kids. I don't remember if you gave us an attendance goal that you told us. Did you tell us if we got 100 kids, you'd put 100 grapes in your mouth?
Do you remember that? That was like a world record night. Remember we had those world record nights?
Yeah. So we would all set world records. I'm sure I did not. I was terrible at those nights.
So when we got to Highland Park in Casper, I think it was a pretty healthy place. I mean, I think there was probably 40 or 50 kids. After a year or so, I said, if we get to 100 kids, I'll swallow 6 goldfish.
That's right. Yeah. Okay. So that was the 100 kid goal. And I did watch him swallow 6 goldfish.
Yes.
By the way, youth group at Highland Park was called Hype.
Hype.
So, Hype. Yeah, Hype. And
Highlands Young Person's Experience.
So if you can just imagine, we've got Hype in Casper, Wyoming, and Hot Church in Phoenix. You realize Jeff has a lot of energy and there's just a lot of fun happening. I just wanted to clarify that. But I did watch him on World Record Night. We counted them. Yeah. I watched him shove 100 grapes in his mouth. Yeah. Friends, awful. I have never, ever seen a mouth stretch that wide.
Yeah, it was. And I don't know why.
There was juice. It was so bad. I was like,
it was.
Did your mouth ever come back to
super bad? Stretched? The night we did that we went over 100 kids. I remember because we were approaching it. The few weeks before that, 80 something, and I think one week we had 96, and the kids were like, "Oh man, we're almost there." But the night we went over, I think it was like 108 or something, and we did. I thought, down the road I'll swallow goldfish once we do that.
I actually remember this, yeah.
So it was like a couple of the older students, like, we're going to the pet store right now, and they're like, I'm like, what? And they're like, we're going to get those goldfish, and they came back with the goldfish, and it's like, okay, I guess I'm doing this.
Jeff's whole ministry trajectory has been growth. Like, he just connects with people in a way. And it leads me to my next question. All through growing up, and even in the years after, when I would get letters and emails, Jeff has this this signature line: "You matter to me, and you matter to God." Mm-hmm. And I wanted you to hear his story, his ministry story, and his trajectory, because I can't even imagine the thousands of people that he has said that to, the thousands of teenagers and adults and people who didn't know if God cared. And I wanted you, Jeff, to talk about what got you saying that to people and what's behind that.
Yeah. So it was an accident. It was like, so, it wasn't that.
That to us.
There were a lot of, we saw at the church plant in Phoenix that really started to grow. We started seeing all these unchurched kids come into the church, and so we'd always have this greeting time, and it was awkward. It was just like, kids didn't know what to say to each other, and high five or whatever. And so one Sunday I just said, find 2 or 3 people and tell them that they matter to you and they matter to God.
Really?
I'm serious. And so they started doing that. Yeah. And so it gave them something to say to that other person. Now, this is kind of a cool part of this story. I had a mother and her son who had some learning challenges, but he always felt welcome at Hot Church. And she wrote me a note. I can still get choked up when I think about this note, but this mom wrote me, this was 2 or 3 years after we had started saying that phrase to each other. She said, I am so glad that David comes to Hot Church. It's the only place in his life where someone says to him, you matter to me and you matter to God. And so it was like this, we're going to keep doing that, And so now, of course, I'm gone. Many of our students have all scattered, across the country. But when they call me or send me an email, it's always at the end, you matter to me, you matter to God. In fact, some of them just started putting the initials, YM2M, YM2G.
Shorten it.
So we know what that is. But, that the other thing I didn't want is for a kid in the greeting to say to someone else, hey, I love you. That felt a little disingenuous to me, this stranger,
right.
That's in the room with you. Hey, I love you. Or so it said what I wanted them to say to each other. And I wanted them to hear, I wanted students to hear that they mattered not only to God, but they mattered to somebody else.
And I just feel like that phrase, you matter to me and you matter to God, is a really tangible way for us to love a person, regardless of how well we know them.
Yeah.
We can have had a friendship and a mentoring friendship and relationship for like 30 years, and it means something. But it can be the person standing next to you in the grocery line, and it still means something to them.
Yeah.
So I wanted you to tell that story because I think it's powerful. Hey, you got what's one highlight you have from and I know it's hard to choose one, but like just something that just sticks with you of God really working through. I mean, you kind of you shared the story of David. Any other thing that jumps up, like because somebody heard those words from you, or heard them from other students, you saw life change for them?
I'll tell you the story of Matt Redder. I don't remember Matt. He wasn't coming to Hot Church yet, but we had gotten to the place, you're going to appreciate this, Denise, we had gotten to the place where we could start to hire people to set up and tear down church.
My team's going, yeah.
Well, we decided that we would hire some students. And so I asked one of my kids who, was a regular, hey, do you know any kids that would love to make some money setting up and tearing down church? We'll pay X amount and whatever. So several, oh yeah, man, I think I've asked some friends that would come and do that. So Matt Redder was one of his friends that came and started setting up and tearing down church. Now, for the first few weeks, he would come set up and then go home and go back to bed. He would tell me this later, when we connected and his life was transformed. But then he was like, after a few weeks, he's like, man, there's so many, kids here, and I know a lot of these kids. I don't feel like going back home. I think I'll just stay and hang out a little bit. Then he started to hear the music, started to hear we used to do drama, started to see the dramas, hearing the message. And his life began to change. Now, I will say that, Matt ended up being in a small group with me. We called them face-to-face groups. I don't know if you remember that. But once a week, I would meet with him and about 4 other guys at a Burger King. I'd buy them all burgers and fries, and we'd talk about their life and about the Lord. I would let them kind of guide the conversation. I would try to bring it back sometimes, but they would just be talking about girls and high school, and then we'd bring it back, and let me just read this scripture and then we'll go home, And they would say today that in fact, one of those kids, a kid named Michael Del Castillo, he called me out of the blue. I hadn't heard from him in years. And he just goes, I want you to know how impactful those Wednesday nights at Burger King were. And, what he was saying was, because here's what's key. You can't just say you matter to me, you matter to God. You got to back it up. You got to back it up with your life, that you'll spend time, that you'll be patient with their questions, especially when you're in youth ministry. But even as adults, I've been a lead pastor now for, 16 years, they've got just as many questions as kids do. We don't lose. I don't think we don't lose that.
Right.
All of that.
I've loved hearing this story because I did not know like how the You Matter to Me, You Matter to God really became just embedded in your ministry. Not just ministry framework, but like how you like communicate the gospel. And so I just love hearing
one of these days. I hope to get to the well. It'll be nice to meet all your folks in a better time when we can sit down and have the meal together, and that'll be an awesome time. People, you have a great pastor here. Denise loves you, loves the Lord, loves what she's doing, is great at what she's doing. I know this is a difficult time, and especially starting a new church is always a difficult time, but hang in there, and the Lord is blessing and is going to bless.
Jeff, thank you for telling me that
you know what?
matter and I matter to God, and I
matter
get
to me.
You matter to God.
You beat me to it.
Love you, girl. Care. Okay.
Okay.
Bye.